Corsair, our non-stimulant, thermogenic, and recomposition agent. Corsair is a super cool product because it's going to help you utilize turning your white adipose tissue, which is for storage of fat, into brown adipose tissue, which is going to help with energy production. So this is great to use for a competition prep or in your weight loss phase. So you can stack it with a stimulant-based thermogenic, or you could also use it in your off-season or muscle building phase to help keep you lean and mean. Corsair.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pro Physique Code. I am Paul Ravella, and today we got Lexi Maitland and Evan Wells with us. How you guys doing?
Doing
good.
well.
How are you?
You like how I just turned it on? You guys were like, wait,
Got
who is
that.
this guy?
You got that radio voice. Yeah.
Who is this guy? Welcome back to the Pro Physique Code. Yeah, you got to be able to just turn it on, kick it up. Today we're going to talk about, are you too old to compete?
Newsflash, you aren't.
End of podcasts. Lexi ended it.
None of it.
Spoiler alert, Lexi. Spoiler alert.
No, I think this is such a great topic to talk about because I know, like we were all three talking before this week. I get asked this question all the time. Paul, I know you said you get asked it all the time. I don't know. I feel like people have this stigma of thinking this is like a young person sport when, yeah, it attracts a lot of young girls. But I personally think that, I actually think that sometimes when you're a little older, you have a little bit of an added benefit just from a muscle maturity standpoint, and a lot of times like finances too. So yeah, I think this will be a good topic to dive into.
I think the first step for most people is going to a show, because it can seem like it's a young person sport, but when you go to the show, you realize it's not a young person sport. There are way more people competing that are older, I would say above 30 than you would expect. And then now, when you go to some of the national shows, they even have like 70, 60-year-old categories that are quite full.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Actually, funny story is I know a girl and I met her through my suit sponsor, so Angel Competition Bikinis, and her name's Renee, and I think she's 72 now, and she started competing. I think she did her first competition when she was like 68. And let me tell you, this woman, I would never guess she is low 70s. Like hanging around her, like she doesn't act that way, and she looks incredible. She didn't compete until she was late 60s, and I love using her story because I think she's just a great example, and yeah, she's awesome.
Yeah, you don't get worse at competing by lifting for longer.
No.
Right.
A lot of times you'll see girls, especially girls that grew up athletes, and they decide not to get into competing till maybe mid-30s, and they come in, and I'm not saying mid-30s is old, but they come in and they have years of muscle on them.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of refining, right? So depending on the time that you've been lifting, starting later can be a benefit to a lot of people.
Yeah.
I think bodybuilding is the one sport that, time is your asset. The best men's bodybuilders have been doing it longer, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't really catch up unless you're like a Phil Heath or somebody that's got just insane genetics. The time is what it takes to build that muscle, and once you have it, it's there. And so I always revert back to like the natural bodybuilding world, because that's where you see, when you take away the hormones and you see what time does. And all the best natural bodybuilders are late 30s, early 40s, sometimes late 40s. Like, it's just the accumulation. And something that I found, because I think, Evan, we talked before the podcast, you did your first show at 36.
Mm-hmm.
I did my first show at 32. Lexi was still in freaking college when she did her first show, but she's a special case. But for me, it was like where my lifestyle was at 32, where I was less, focused on like the social life and partying. I was being more consistent with the gym and diet. And I thought, oh, I could actually do this now without it negatively impacting my life outside.
Yeah. Yeah. I fell into it because I played sports in college. I was always disciplined. And then when I got out of college, I didn't have that discipline anymore. So I fell into kind of like the party scene, the fun scene, all that type, like most people do at some point. And I didn't get a lot of that in college. I did, but not to a certain extent, because I was playing football, and playing football at the University of Georgia, you're limited by what you can do just purely based on the time you have available, which is not a lot. So I ended up doing it because I needed structure. right? And I was at a
Yeah.
point in my life where I knew I needed it again. And I ran into a guy that was in really good shape, and he told me that he was doing, and that's how I got my first coach and fell into it. And like I said, I think it was 35 when I actually started. It was 35 or 36. I need to go back and look and see with it. But I can tell you, I had a big advantage because I had been training for so many years
Yeah.
going into it.
Yeah. What about you, Lexi? Because I know, although you started at a very young age, I will call you an old soul. You're not someone that I've ever known to be like out partying and drinking. You were always very mature for your age. To be able to prep in a dorm room says a lot about you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, yeah, my whole family and all my friends always say like I'm an old soul, and totally I just kind of embrace that. But I feel like for me, I mean, it was kind of similar to what you were just saying, Evan. I mean, I can't ever remember a time in my life where I didn't have like a competitive sport that I was doing. Because I started gymnastics from a very young age, and for those of you that know, like once you get to a certain level with gymnastics, it's I don't think gruesome is the word, but like it's pretty vigorous. I had practice 5 days out of the week. I was just very used to like that discipline and having that competitive outlet. And then when I quit gymnastics, like I remember one of my worst fears was like, all right, well, like now what am I gonna do? And so then I did long distance running, and then I was also on the competitive cheer team, and then I went to college and I was like I was getting into the gym scene a little bit more, and I just wanted something like else to do to feed into that competitive drive that I had. So I went, I actually had gotten approached by a couple people at the gym that I went to when I moved to Florida, and they were like, "Oh, do you compete? Do you compete?" And I was like, "No, I didn't really know anything about the bodybuilding scene." And then eventually I started looking into it, and so when I kind of got into it, so it was like my next thing, right? So I can't really ever think of a time in my life where I haven't had that like competitive outlet. I guess I just kind of thrive on that.
I think that's a pretty natural transition because, Evan, you brought it up. You played sports in college. I played sports in college. And I think there is a post athletic career depression that hits because the structure is gone, the focus is gone, you're working towards something. And for me, the next thing for me was like, okay, I want to bench 225 for 5, or I want to weigh 200 pounds. Or like I started creating these like gym goals. It had nothing to do with competing. Yeah, I was reading all the bodybuilding magazines at the time, but for me, it was more about like I wanted to look a certain way. So I lifted for 15 years before I decided to do a bodybuilding show. And then I even waited a whole nother year to do that show. So the idea of, are you too old to compete? I think when we first started competing, Evan, there was really one division. In my first show, there was one division. It was bodybuilding.
Yep.
They did have figure for women, but they also had bodybuilding for women. So there was multiple for women, but for men, it was bodybuilding. That was it. Now, what got me to do my first show, and this is something I think maybe people don't realize, and it's why I say always go to shows. They have categories for inclusion. So even back then, they had novice, open, and masters. I was 32, so I was only eligible for the novice and the open. And back then, you're going to laugh, you were not allowed to cross over. My first show I did, it was Deke Warner's show. So if you guys are from Florida, everybody knows Deke Warner. He's an amazing human being. Just great shows. So when I signed up, which I like telling these stories because it definitely ages me, I had to print out a piece of paper, fill it out, and mail it in. And then Deke actually called me a few days later and said, "Hey, I see you signed up for novice bodybuilding. Do you need any help?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I'd love some help." He's like, "Meet me at Gold's Gym and we'll talk." Imagine, just think about that. A promoter calling you and just seeing if you need any help. That's how nice he is. So actually, after we went through all the posing, he was like, "Hey man, I mean, I know you're new, but you could probably do the open." And I was like, "Are you insane? Like, I'm 6'3". Like, I ain't doing open." He tried to convince me, but I was not allowed to cross over. I said, "I'm going to stick with novice for this show. I'll do open if I do well for the next show." But that really made me feel that whole year that I was preparing that I had a shot to be competitive. I didn't care if, I wanted to win, but I think as going into a bodybuilding show, if you know there's zero chance you're going to be competitive, it's going to change the nature of your approach. At least for me, it did.
Oh, 1000%. I think like mindset is key going into it. If you do look at it from the standpoint of, oh, I'm too old, I'm not going to compare to the youngsters, well, then yeah, that's probably going to be the case. Because I think, yes, that will directly feed into kind of how you approach your prep. I think you would probably have a tendency to be a little bit more flexible if you just knew, oh, well, I'm not going to have a chance anyways. So I think mindset is like the first key there, that you just, you have to have a good mindset going into it. Otherwise, yeah, you probably aren't going to do so well.
And the reason I competed in my first show is I didn't even know like men's physique was a thing at that time with it. I thought it was just purely open bodybuilders, which, you know, that's
Yeah.
what I saw. And then when I learned men's physique was a thing, I was like, oh, this is something I could probably do. It was a few years old and classic physique had kind of just got started. And, you know, that was far more attainable for me
Yeah,
than the
it's
open division would
inclusive,
be.
and that's the addition of the new divisions. And I know bodybuilding purists, when they first added, I think when they added figure, it made sense. But I think a lot of people, when they added bikini and men's physique, thought, oh, great. So you can just walk in a pair of board shorts and do a bodybuilding show. I remember a lot of people were up in arms about that. But no one's complaining now because it's more inclusive. And a lot of those athletes use that as a stepping stone if they want to keep going, or if they have the potential to keep going. A lot of people that would have never done a show have done a show now. And it's completely changed the sport. I know some people will argue like, oh, bodybuilding's not big. Listen, when my first show, what was that? 2006, I went to my first show. It was hard to even find a show. Like there were a few shows throughout the year. Like you had to know when they were. There was flyers in the gym. So now I feel like there's a show every weekend in Florida for sure.
Right.
Yeah,
It depends where you live for sure. But there, I mean, Florida, Texas, Vegas, California, there are a lot of shows there like year round.
yeah, and what's interesting too is if I would have started the sport younger, I absolutely would have tried to grow into classic physique. And I think what's interesting for men's physique when I got into it, I think that division, along with the bikini division, are the two that have evolved the most from where they initially started with that. Because my initial goal was get men's physique and try to grow into classic. And then men's physique literally just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I still wasn't big enough and still not big enough now for men's
That's the
physique.
wild thing. The amount of progress you made from your pro card win to your pro debut was insane, but the whole division just went,
Just kept going.
it just
Yep.
to the point where now they had to institute weight caps.
Mm-hmm.
There was no weight caps when you competed. They were starting to weigh people with the idea of, okay, they're going to create one. But, I don't know. Did the guy that won the Hurricane Pro, the Kaiki Pro, is it Carlos? Is that his name?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, do we ever know his weight that day?
No, but I know they took weights that day, but they didn't. The weight cap wasn't instituted yet at
Yeah.
that point with it. No, it wasn't until after that. So no, I'd be shocked if he did make weight. And another big thing for the men's physique category that evolved is they actually like judge your legs now, how they look in the shorts, right? So that is kind of part of it. It's a full total package on things. So everything does evolve with it, and that's the cool thing about getting into the sport is you have a place to be able to compete no matter what the age is.
Right, right. Well, I have some interesting perspective because I was thinking about this before we started recording. And I think that oftentimes when, you have a female who is a little bit older, whatever age you want to classify that as, it is a very likely thing to think like, oh, I'm not going to compare to the youngsters, or I'm not going to have an advantage compared to the youngsters. But I feel like on the flip side, like especially with me getting into the sport pretty young, I think you can also like if you're younger, you can also look at it from like the opposite lens, because sometimes I'll think about like, wow, you want to rush the process sometimes and just you wish you had more muscle, you wish you had more muscle density. And, that is something that a lot of older competitors have, right? Especially if they've been living this lifestyle for 10 plus years, they just have that muscle density. A lot of times they're not getting that feedback of like, okay, go take a full year off and just grow some muscle, right? Not all, like a lot of times they're not getting that feedback. Whereas as a younger competitor, that a lot of times that tends to be your feedback. You have that just more youthful kind of like baby muscle look, right? So it's easy to kind of see negatives and positives to like both sides of the spectrum there, whether you're a young competitor or whether you're an older competitor, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think, and so let's talk about the idea of if you're too young to compete, because I think, oh, well, you know, I've said 32, I've been 36. Some people, that's not that old, right? But I've had competitors that didn't even start competing, really start working out until their 50s, right? And then, you know, I did a podcast with Wendy Massey not too long ago, who just started working out with her partner, and he was like, dude, what is happening to your body? She just had those crazy genetics, which if you've seen Wendy, you know that. But she went from someone that really didn't work out to winning IFBB pro shows in a couple of years, right? So, and she didn't start competing until late 40s. So yeah, I think there really is no wrong time to start competing. Obviously, your goals might be a little bit different depending on when you start, but the one thing that I've definitely seen amongst the masters competitors is a great camaraderie. They really enjoy the sport. They have a great mindset around the sport. They don't get so caught up in placings or winning or losing. They want to win, but you know, some of the younger competitors I've coached, they only like the sport until they start to hit a roadblock, and then they can't handle it. Whereas, you know, like even myself, I do the sport purely because I enjoy prep and the challenge of it. Getting on stage is fun, but it's definitely not the thing that I'm looking forward to the most. I like the process. So therefore, like, win, lose, or draw, I have a great time at the show and the great time after.
I want to comment on what you just said, Paul, though, about how like the masters, the camaraderie and just the positivity, like especially backstage, is just so incredible. And I had somebody who responded once, or responded on my Instagram yesterday once I said that we were going to talk about this today, and she said the same thing. She's actually one of your clients, Paul, but she said like the camaraderie backstage, the support in the masters like group, like it's unlike no others. And it's funny because I remember, let me think, what year was it? I think it wasn't last year, the year before that, when I went to the San Antonio Pro, and Paul, you had like 5 or 6 masters competitors and you weren't at that show. So I kind of helped them. And honestly, I would say that's one of the shows I had like the most fun at, is like being with the masters ladies. They are
Yeah.
just, they're awesome. And you, like you said, they have such a great mindset around things. Yeah, I think we're all human and it's natural, like to get disappointed. I think everybody can get disappointed in placings, but I feel like even with them, if they don't place the way they want, they're not so hard on themselves. You know, they move on, they know that they can get better, they improve. They don't let that placing like dictate their entire well-being and self-worth. So yeah, I think it's incredible to see just the camaraderie and the support that these ladies have for each other.
Yeah, I don't think we really appreciate what our bodies are capable of at a certain age. We focus on what we can't do, what our negatives are. And the competitors, as we get a little bit older, like myself, I'm 48 now, you really appreciate like the sport, and you appreciate the people that are in it. Like, you know, at a certain age, there's maybe some animosity because like you see people as like they're in your way, but that's actually not the case. You're in your own way, right? So when you can go to a show and realize like the work is done, these people actually get me. They're some of the few people in the world that understand what I've gone through, what I'm going through, why I'm crazy, why I weigh rice cakes. Like, you know, those are your people. It really does make the sport much more enjoyable. And honestly, like, I travel so much now. The one thing I notice is that, like, you know, when I first started coaching Wendy, I had a competitor on the team, Miriam Jenkins. They ended up doing a show together. They are inseparable. They travel to shows, so they've become like best buds that, you know, do the sport together. Same thing with you know, Maria Nemeth and Kathy Seitz. I'll never forget, like, they met at a show. You would think they were best friends for life. In fact, you know, Maria is going up to the Nashville Fit Show to see Kathy walk in the angel competitions. You know, like they plan a lot of their life around seeing each other at these events.
I love that. Yeah, and actually that specific fashion show that Kathy's walking in, that's feeds into this topic right here, because it's like a masters only fashion show. So you can't walk unless you're, think it's either, I think the cap is like 40 and over. I don't think they
Yeah.
did 35 and over. So that's really cool to see.
Yeah.
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 And I feel like, I don't know about you guys, but all of my masters competitors who got into the sport of competing at a later age, they all usually tell me, oh my gosh, Lexi, this is the best shape I've been in my life. Like
Right.
I was in worse shape 10 years ago when I was 10 years younger compared to where I'm at now. I look better. I look more youthful. I feel better. And I always say muscle is the fountain of youth. I mean, there's been many times where I remember when like a couple years ago when I learned how old Miriam Jenkins was, and I
Right.
was like, no way. I just did not believe her. I was like, wait, no, you're kidding. And I was just flabbergasted. But I mean, I do feel like you see that a lot in the bodybuilding industry. You see a lot of ladies who, they just take very good care of their body. They have a lot of muscle, and it just generally, like, it youthens their look. So I feel like muscle is where it's at if you're trying to stay looking young.
Well, let's talk about muscle, because that's a big reason why I think a lot of people don't get into the sport. They maybe don't understand it. A term that I used throughout my coaching is called training age, right? And so training age is basically how long you've been lifting. So you can be 50 years old with 30 years of training, or you can be 50 years old with 0 years of training, right? But you can also have something that improves your muscle density without going to the gym, like a sport. Like if you're playing a sport that requires a lot of fitness, like, anytime I get a soccer player that transitions into bodybuilding, it's easy for them. They've already got a good foundation of lower body muscle. Their endurance is really good. They know how to push themselves. So there are a lot of sports that kind of help you transition into bodybuilding. But training age, it's almost exciting when someone has very little training age, because you just know they're going to see that insane progress from the moment they start being consistent.
Yes,
Absolutely.
1,000%. It's that whole concept of like the newbie gains, and it's funny because like when I first started lifting, I didn't even know like newbie gains were a thing, and so part of me sometimes wishes I would have like approached my training a little bit differently back then. But you live and you learn. But yeah, that first, I mean, if somebody has not trained like a bodybuilder ever in their life, that first year of training, I mean, they can do a lot with their physical changes.
Yeah, I think when you talk about the fountain of youth, as we age, I mean, this is something, studying exercise science, Lex, I'm sure you probably discussed this too in some of your classes, but, one of the biggest risk factors as we age, which we don't like to talk about. I'm 48. I don't have to worry about this. Evan, you don't have to worry about this. You're in your 40s. But like, as we age, that's where injuries occur. When you start to lose muscle, you start to lose bone density, you don't have the mobility to be self-sufficient, you fall, you break a bone. Like, these are real risk factors. And, you know, some of the benefits of this sport are getting in the gym, you're building up your bone density, you're keeping more muscle mass, you're going to be more independent for the rest of your life, and you're just setting yourself up for a much higher quality of life later in life.
1,000%. Actually, one of the most like vivid kind of memories like I have growing up is my grandma, my mom's mom. She has osteoporosis, and I always remember, like, not to like say this in a bad way, but the running joke was always like, Grammy would have a simple fall down the stairs, and like she broke a ton of bones, had to get surgery from that simple little fall. But part of it was because she has osteoporosis, and her bones are just so fragile that they break super easily. So I always remember that growing up, and that's why my mom was always like, drink your calcium. But I now, it's kind of, even though being younger, it's nice to kind of think, okay, well, as I'm adding this muscle to my frame, it's going to help me in the long term. And I tell my clients this all the time, like, you're not just going to the gym and living this lifestyle for the aesthetic reasons. I mean, yes, that's part of it, but you want to be somebody who can run around and, and be athletic when you're 60, 70 years old without, having a sore muscle or breaking a bone, right? And I think that sometimes we lose sight of the fact that that is like, that's going to come if you continue to live this lifestyle. So
Yeah, I think, would the best thing to do would be go to a national show where there are masters, like North Americans, Masters, Nationals, and Universe, and later in the year USA Championships. When they walk out and they go, okay, this is the over 55, men's physique. You're like, there's no way. Like
Yeah.
these guys look incredible. Same thing with the over 55 bikini. Like the
Oh,
women, you're like, what's funny is the announcers will often like, haha, like let's check some IDs, ladies. Like there's no way you're 50 or 55. It literally changes. I mean, we kind of live at a time when, I mean, I don't know, Evan, do you ever feel this way? Maybe I'm crazy. I actually feel weird when I'm out in public, like at a water park or a beach with my kids, and I have my shirt off
Yeah.
because I'm so in shape compared to like at a bodybuilding show, I'm in normal shape. I'm shredded, but I'm, no big deal. But when you're in public and you're anywhere near 10, 12% body fat with good muscle, you stick out like a sore thumb.
You do. And sometimes it's a good way, sometimes it's a bad way, but you do get a lot of judgment based off that, for sure.
Yeah.
People automatically look at you and consider that or think that you're conceited, that you only think about yourself, that your life fully revolves around the gym, that, you know, all you care about is your looks because you take care of yourself and you have priorities. That's what it's about. And once people actually kind of know, I mean, Paul, you probably get the same stuff. It's like, what do you spend 3 hours a day at the gym, 7 days a week? It's like,
I mean, I've
no.
gotten it to a degree. I'm not as
Like,
not as big as you. But usually when people stop me now, they'll kind of ask me about my diet or something, like, oh, what do you eat to look like that? Or, I don't usually have the heart to tell them like it's 30 years of consistency, not
right.
what I
yeah,
ate last week.
Right. That's
yeah.
funny. I actually got like funny story. I got asked, I ran to the grocery store the other day after leaving the gym and had like a tank top on or something. And there was this table, these ladies had this like table set up outside. They were raising money for something. So I stopped and I was talking to them, donated a little, and the lady was like, oh my gosh, what do you do? Cause I guess she just like saw me and I don't know, to me, I look at myself all the time. I don't really think much of it. I just kind of feel like I look normal, but she was like, what do you do? And she had candy on the table that she was like giving to people who donated. And she's like, oh, you probably don't eat sugar, right? And it was like, I get that all the time. People are like, oh, you probably don't eat sugar or you don't eat carbs. And I'm like, well, you'd probably be in for a rude awakening. And you're right, Paul. It's like, you don't have the heart to tell them that you've been doing this and you've basically been a robot for like the past how many years, right? But I just thought it's always funny to hear what people assume you do to look the way you do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the
And
truth is, it's
that's why I love
consistency.
putting out content. I mean, it's great
Ah,
when you can dispel that stuff. Sorry
yes.
about that, Evan. What was that?
No, I mean, the truth is, it's consistency, right? And it's not a sexy answer, but it's the truth. It's being consistent with it. And it's making changes when you need to make changes. It's doing things to improve your physique, not necessarily because you feel like doing it, because you know that's what you need to do to improve your physique. And if your goal is bodybuilding, which is building a physique, then you should work towards building that physique that you want, right? It could be for stage, it could be, for in your mind, however you want to look. Bodybuilding is building your body. And to do that, you have to be at least somewhat structured with it. And people don't like that. It's, I get people all the time say, hey, I want to look like you. I'm like, no, you don't. You know, the
Right.
years it takes to get like this. Like, trust me, you
Right.
don't. You
A
don't.
lot of delayed gratification.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of my favorite sayings is, I don't know when I started saying it, but I started saying it on my YouTube videos. I'm like, people will be like, oh, stubborn body fat. And I say, body fat is not stubborn. Body fat is just part of our body. People are stubborn.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
body fat isn't like, no, you won't get rid of me. No, it's what's up here. It's like, I don't want to change my routine. I like weekends out with the boys. Yeah, okay. So it's not the body fat. It's you that's stubborn.
Mhm.
Right, right. Well, an interesting thing I just thought of too is kind of feeding into that, like how sometimes we can, I think without even realizing it, become very set in our ways or stubborn, like with what we've always done. But I don't know if you guys have ever dealt with this, but I do find that sometimes, not all the times, like the master's level ladies can be a little bit trickier when it comes to food or like reverse dieting, because I feel like that generation, like a lot of them grew up in a generation where, all they were taught is don't eat carbs or eat very little, or, they grew up in that generation where like it was idolized if you were just really skinny. And so I find that sometimes, not all the times, but the ladies who are in that or come from that generation struggle a little bit with like reversing or wanting to add in carbs and knowing like that it's actually going to help them because they're just very set in their ways and they've always looked at food as being like fear mongering. That's just kind of the society that they grew up in. Do you guys ever deal with that?
A little bit. I would say most of my master's girls eat far more than most of the younger girls. They need a lot more food. And most of it is especially if they've been training for a little while too, right? Like if it's different, if they're just getting into working out, yes, that's absolutely the case. But if it's something that they've been training for a while and they have a good amount of muscle mass on it, it's kind of scary the amount of food you got to feed some of them leading into a show, like in reversing out of it too. I mean, their food can get pretty significant up there
Yeah,
because
I mean,
again, it's
I
the more
don't
muscle
think
mass you
it's,
have, the more food you can eat.
yeah, I don't think it's just a master's thing with the, you know, the fear of certain types of foods, you know, so everyone kind of grew up with whatever their era was, like carbs are bad, sugars are bad, fats are bad. What, you know, there's lots of different, you know, even now some people are like, isn't protein bad? I hear it's bad for your kidneys. And I'm like, where did you hear that?
Oh,
So,
yeah.
I think there's the potential for any of that to be the case. But I will say that, like, I think older competitors or just people in general are less inclined to just be so binary, good, bad. You know, they understand they've got a little more life experience. And so um
Right.
yeah, I find, I don't know, I used to joke when I first started coaching masters competitors, I like coaching them better because after the show they just wanted to go to bed.
True.
I used to have a lot of nights out with like the open competitors, you know, drinking in Vegas. And then I remember one year I was at Universe and I had a gentleman win his men's physique pro card. He won the overall. And I was like, oh, we're gonna be going out. His name was Steve. And he's like, hey man, do you mind if we just get like a burger in the hotel bar and go to bed? I was like, yes, let's go. I was like,
Exactly.
Well, I have okay, so I have a couple things I want to talk about because these all come from some comments that I got on Instagram pertaining to this topic. So, um, let's talk a little bit about, I think the one thing that you do have to just kind of watch as you do age, I would assume this is probably the same for males, but especially for females, is that skin elasticity and that youthful kind of look with your skin, that glow. I think that is important. So I did have somebody ask, like, what are our tips for that when it comes to, what do we see being the best ways to promote good skin elasticity? I don't know, tight skin that just doesn't age as you get older.
I mean, first and foremost, it probably comes down to how you treated yourself the first 40 or 50 years of your life. If you were 100 pounds overweight and you've lost a lot of weight, that skin may not ever get back to where it was if you never were overweight. I think genetics is huge on this. When you talk about somebody like Miriam Jenkins, um, you know, she just comes, I think she's from the Philippines and she's black. So like that combination, she just got a very youthful look to her skin, even in her, you know, late 50s. And I see that a lot, you know. So there's a couple things. And I actually did a YouTube video. I spoke to a plastic surgeon because I was generally curious about this myself. I wanted to know, but there is a limit to the elasticity. I always find that if you lose weight properly, that helps too, right?
Yeah, not having those, I would say one of the best things you can do is like if you get into competing and as you age, you want to continue to compete. I think not having those huge dramatic swings in your body weight all the time. So not gaining a ton of weight in your off season and then not having to lose it all at once. I think staying within more of like a regimented weight range. Not saying you need to stay stage lean all the time, but I think that certainly helps with that elasticity.
And look, you can even see this in today's age with like Ozempic and tirzepatide and things like that, where people lose weight very, very quickly with that. And you can even see they almost get loose skin in their face because they lose weight so fast with that. And so I've always been like you, Paul, losing weight correctly and in a good measured way is going to lead the best results long term with that. If you want something right now and you want it this second, there's going to be some consequences to that. And skin elasticity is going to be one of them, especially if you've been overweight for a significant amount
Well,
of
so
time.
there is something you can do to augment that, and that is add muscle. Like muscle is going to make the skin fuller and tighter. And this is something that, you know, we can probably talk about on a peaking podcast a little bit more specifically, but dehydrating is going to make the skin look way worse. So if you have some, you know, less than ideal skin tone, like, you know, it's not, you know, it's got a little elasticity to it. If you dehydrate, like your peak week protocol calls for pulling water out and pulling sodium out, I've noticed I see the skin start to get a more dry look, a little more wrinkly look versus when the athlete's really filled out. And now whether that's more the skin is hydrated or if it's more the muscles really pushing out, you know, so be it what it is. But I just think, you know, I can usually see at a master's show, I'll be like, oh yeah, she's too dehydrated. You can kind of, the skin just looks different.
Yeah, no, I know what you're talking about exactly, that the skin looks different. And then it also sometimes, if they're really lean, it just makes them look really like grainy too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think to some degree too, people would be very surprised by we're talking about, loose skin. Obviously, loose skin, if it's in excess, can be very, very visibly apparent on stage. However, I find that there's actually a decent amount of competitors, even like pro level competitors, that have a little bit of loose skin, like especially in their core. But when they pose and they have their stage tan on, like you don't even see it. Or even like stretch marks too. For people who have had, maybe multiple kids, they have some stretch marks and they're really worried that that's going to hinder them on stage. And I'm always very surprised to sometimes see some of these like even pro level competitors who they do have like slight stretch marks, but they're just super, like they're not super apparent when they hit their poses and when they have that stage tan on. So, so if you are somebody that has a, couple stretch marks or a little bit of loose skin, it's not an end all be all, especially if you got, you have the proper stage tan. And if you pose correctly, there's a lot of little things you can do to kind of hide it a little bit.
A big topic we can discuss too, because a lot of women reach out to me and ask this. So like, hey, I'm going through menopause, or I just went through menopause. What do I have to do differently? Right. And the first thing I always say is like, the rules don't change. Like, even though your body is changing, going to the gym, being consistent with your diet is going to give you the best possible response. But we now live in an era where hormone therapy is no longer cloak and dagger. You can go to a hormone therapy clinic like Aspire Rejuvenation in Orlando, get on a consult with them at no cost, and find out what's going on under the hood. Actually, if you do the blood work, there is a consultation cost with that. But that can actually tell you like, okay, what can be done, and they can actually prescribe treatment, or they might tell you no treatment. And that's one of the things I love about Aspire is they're not pushing any agenda. They're pushing health. Evan, you work with them, correct?
Yeah, and I know them quite well, and I think that's one of the big benefits with them is, and the big reason I gain a lot of respect for them is they've told a lot of people no. No, I'm sorry, we're not for you. Your blood work's not in a good place where this is going to benefit you. Or their idea of what they thought would benefit the client necessarily wasn't what the client wanted, right? So I think that is an awesome, awesome clinic to go to because they care actually about balancing your hormones first. And look, the older you get, it's more about balance than it is about performance enhancing here. We don't want to try to pump a bunch of stuff like PEDs later on in life. It's not necessarily going to be the best for your heart and for longevity here. But the opposite of that can be true. And the fact that if your hormones are in a bad place, it can cause issues. So getting everything balanced in a good spot will make everything function that much better. And especially, again, this is if you're in a non-natural tested organization too with that. That's a big one here.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say that's probably the biggest thing that I see with my ladies who are around that like perimenopausal state is just getting their blood work, working with working with a hormone clinic like Aspire. I had a client recently reach out to them and she's had amazing results with them so far and has really appreciated their responsiveness and attentiveness. But yeah, I feel like just staying on top of that side of things, which I think a lot of younger competitors most of the time are already doing that too. But I think it becomes even more important as you age and get around that perimenopausal state, because that's when your hormones can be a little bit more susceptible to just being off. So I think as long as you're balancing those, the best you can, I don't see the perimenopausal state being a huge issue for a lot of people in terms of like their competing success or being able to prep them.
Yeah, and that was kind of my point, is that I think sometimes we can get in our head. Like I had a friend who took a saliva test for testosterone, and it came back really low. And for the next couple of weeks, he was like, his training was bad, his diet was bad. He was kind of like, yeah, my test is low. Then he went and got a blood test follow-up. Turns out his test was really high, and that saliva test was bullshit. And guess what? His training got better, his diet got better, he started to look better and feel better. It was almost like he manifested his own symptoms because he just accepted that was his lot. And, I think, you know, knowing I'm 48, if you would have asked me how I was going to look and feel at 48 when I was 25, it wouldn't be this. I feel as good as I've ever felt in every aspect of my life. You know, um, I'm playing very high level tennis at this point. I'm playing 2 to 3 days a week. I'm going to the gym 5 days a week. I'm working a lot. I got 3 kids, 10 and under. Um, just I'm just firing on all cylinders. But I'm pretty sure, at 48, when I was in my 20s, was old, right? And I do not feel that now. But I think a lot of that has to do with just the lifestyle that I have. And I haven't accepted, like, oh, I should probably just slow down and maybe play some shuffleboard or something. I don't know.
That's interesting that you mentioned you had a friend, like I think that placebo effect is a really, really big thing. And I find, if anything, like for females around that perimenopausal state, I think the only thing that can sometimes just be a little, I mean, it depends how you look at it. It's not like it's an end all be all, but something that you just have to stay a little bit more on top of is regulating like their cycles. Sometimes those are a little bit more like abnormal around that perimenopausal state. They're not getting it on the same day every month. And so that can be sometimes a little bit, trickier to manage. But, as long as you're staying on top of
Listen,
that.
I'm not suggesting that there aren't some more severe symptoms, and there aren't some times where you need to, like, give yourself some grace and take a day off, but just the idea of accepting defeat. You
Yeah.
every time I talk to a guy my age that, has a beer belly and he wants to get in shape, he's like, yeah, but I'm over 40, so my testosterone's low and I have a slow metabolism. I'm like, you don't have a slow metabolism. You have a slow life. Metabolism is just a function of how we treat ourselves. It's just the rate at which we burn calories. You're not going to burn any calories if you sit around all day and don't put any effort into your physique.
Right.
So, it's like, it's body fat isn't stubborn. People are, or your metabolism isn't slow. You are. Don't blame your metabolism. I mean, the metabolism slows very little as we age when you take care of yourself. Same with testosterone. Testosterone drops very little. When you talk about those studies where, like, oh, you lose X% of testosterone past the age of 35, whatever, the rest of your life, that's the general damn population. Don't be the general population. Be the exception. Be the one that takes care of yourself, that, puts some effort into your daily routine. And then, it's remarkable. I mean, I'm telling you, go to a bodybuilding show and watch the masters.
Yeah.
And that's one of my things when it comes to hormone optimization too, that I think, and I want people to understand, is don't use it as a crutch to make up for massive gaps in the other parts of your life. If your eating is garbage, if you're not training, you're not doing any of this stuff like that, you're like, oh, I'm going to go get on TRT because it's going to make me feel youthful again. You are going to be severely disappointed in the results of it. If you this switch that changes everything, it's sure not, because none of the other stuff in your life is right. It's not a magic pill.
TRT isn't going to help you make more money, have more time in your day, have less responsibilities, and it's not going to put you first. You have to do all those things. You have to put yourself first. You have to put in the work. And that's why, it's just so common now. Everyone's on TRT, but I've had a couple of my close friends that started it and then regretted it because they didn't change their routine. And now they're kind of stuck on TRT, because if you do it, you have to come off it the right way. It actually augments your body's production of hormones. So they were doing it more for the, there are some companies that will push that agenda. Even if you are in the healthy range, hey, we could optimize you. Listen, if you're not going to do the work to benefit from it, or if you feel good, that's another one. Like, I'm 48. I'm probably a great candidate to go in and get TRT. Why the fuck would I get TRT? I feel amazing.
Right.
Here's a great example of that. If you have like a 1975 Ford Civic and you pull up to the gas station, are you going to put the $7 a gallon premium gas in your gas tank? It's not going to do any difference, anything at all. You can put the base level shit in there. It's not going to make a difference. It's
I'm
the
just
same
laughing
thing with
because
your
I don't know what a 1975 Ford Civic is.
Honda Civic. Yeah, Ford Civic. Ford
I
Escape. I'm
touched
trying
that.
to, a vehicle that doesn't even exist.
Yeah, there's definitely no Ford Escape in 1970.
No, it definitely is not. It's about, look, optimization is great if you're going to optimize the other parts of your life with
Right.
things. And optimization doesn't mean perfection here, people. Let's not get that twisted either. Optimization means prioritizing. It means doing the things that you need to do the majority of the time.
Yeah. Here's what I just looked it up. Here's what a 1976 Honda Civic looks like. If you can,
There it is.
There you go.
Hey, listen, when I
Put
was in
Supreme in
high
there.
school, my aunt had one of those and it had like 330,000 miles on it. I'm telling you, those things will never die.
wow. Oh, that's hilarious.
It was
Uh,
like passed down from like every kid in the family. My aunt had it.
that's funny. Well, I have to shout out somebody that commented too on my Instagram. So she said that she started lifting at 50 and she just won her pro card at 54 a couple weeks ago.
What's her
So
name? It's not my Rhonda, is it?
I need to see because her name is not her profile. Oh yeah, it is Rhonda. Is that what you said?
Yeah. She
Mhm.
Yeah,
just won her pro card at
yeah,
Masters. Yeah,
yeah,
she was at the St. Pete Pro. She got second at Universe and then she won at Masters Nationals. Yeah.
yeah. It was her. I had to check there because she's got a different username. So
Yeah, it's like RHZ or something. Yeah.
yeah. So kudos to her. That's awesome.
Well, I see that all the time. So Melissa Desert, she lives in California. She reached out to me right after she turned 50. Now she is like a gym rat, had been lifting weights for 30 years. And she was like, "Do you think I could compete?" And I was like, "Not only can you compete, I guarantee you get your pro card in 2 shows." And she's like, "How?" I go, "First of all, you just have to do the show to qualify to go to nationals." And
Yeah.
for those of you that aren't familiar, the qualification for nationals, if you're a masters competitor, is you just have to compete. There's no placing requirement. Now, it doesn't mean you should necessarily go there, but so she did. She did a show in Tahoe, and then what show? I think it was NPC Universe. She first show, first time out, wins her class, turned pro. So like, if you've got that base of muscle and you've been lifting for those years, and she gave me a great compliment. She's like, honestly, I live in California and I never wanted to prep because I saw what all the girls went through and I thought they looked terrible. And it wasn't until I saw your competitors compete that I thought, okay, I could do this because they do
Mhm.
macros. And so, shout out to Melissa. But that's a part of the sport too. Like the stage is always there. Like you can just be putting in the work for years thinking about competing and then one day pull the trigger and that all that work's going to be benefiting you.
Right. And I
Another
also,
thing I think
oh, go for it, Evan.
Another thing I think that's great about competing later on in life is your tolerance for things is typically much higher than it is when you're younger. Your tolerance for pain, your tolerance for stress, your tolerance for difficulty, tolerance for the ability to be able to push through tough situations typically gets better as we age, which means prep will be much easier for you a little bit later on in life because you've typically gone through a few harder situations than you have when you're younger.
Yeah, it's a good point. And also, I think, like, I feel like this is kind of obvious, but finances for, as you get older, not to say that, people who are younger necessarily all have bad finances, but like, as you get older, you have more savings, more discretionary income that usually it's a little bit easier to travel to shows and not have to stress out about it. So I think that's another pro of it as well. Yeah. And I think like it's so interesting too. I was just pulling up the list of Olympia qualified athletes for this year. And and I think it's interesting, like when you look at a lot of these names, I don't know the exact ages of all these ladies off the top of my head, but like even like Ashley Kay, I mean, I think a lot of people don't realize don't quote me. I think she's what, like mid 30s.
I
She
remember hearing she was 34, so she's probably around that 34, 35 mark.
Yeah, I think she may be around 35 because I think technically I feel like I've heard her say she does qualify to like compete as a masters competitor if she wants, but she doesn't want to. But I think people forget like some of these top level pros are
let's
And-
be real. 35 is bullshit
Oh
masters.
yeah,
That's not really masters.
I don't think that's Masters. Jessica Wilson, though, she's a great example. She won the Masters Olympia was it last year when
Mhm.
that was? Yeah, last year. And she's 40, I don't know the exact age.
She's probably 41 or
I
42 at
think
this point. I mean,
I think she's more
I
like
haven't
44
seen
range.
her compete this year at all. But
Yeah,
She's Chicago pro.
yeah, Chicago.
Janine Herrera did it. Oh no, you're talking about
No,
Jessica Wilson. But
Jessica.
Janine Herrera was another one that if she didn't do the Masters division, I would have no idea that she was a Masters. She has a very youthful look. She was placing top 5 at many open pro shows and winning all the Masters shows she did. And I think she might have got second or third at the first Masters Olympia. Yeah, so she's over 40.
Yeah, she does have that very youthful look. Yeah, and I don't know how old Angelica is, but she's probably what, like, is she like mid 30s, high 30s?
Yeah, I feel like I'm not supposed to comment on these things.
Yeah, I know. I feel like it is a weird, like, age is a taboo thing. I don't know why it is for females. I don't know, like, why some people are secretive about their age. I mean, I don't know.
Well, I remember
But,
Jen Ronziti when she was placing at the top of the Olympia, she was at or near 40, right? Like, so
I remember that. Yeah, yeah. And so it's always interesting. I think,
Camille Perriot, she used to always get, there's a lot of good examples. And I think a lot of the women aren't talking about their age, but
right.
the bulk of the competitors right now at the top, I believe Marine's over 30, but your Jens, your Laura Lees, they're in their late 20s, 28.
Yeah.
Ari's 29, Daraja's 29. So like, I might have aged Daraja up a year. She's either 28 or 29 because her birthday was just July. I think she turned 29. But like, so you got a lot of those girls that are going to be around for a while.
Right, right. Yeah, and it'll be interesting to just see how many of them stick around long term and like evolve with the sport, because I think Ashley Kay is just, she's always the example I think of like, it's crazy to see what she looked like 10 years ago and how she just continuously evolves with the sport, gets better and better, and still places how she does 10 years later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. No, I mean, bodybuilding is done properly. It is an amazing outlet for fitness. There's always going to be extremes in every sport, but the vast majority, I always like Sandy Williamson is, a great ambassador for the sport for that reason. She loves and she said, you should go to, the women's conference that the NPC did in Orlando, sit in that room and compare that to the general population. You got a couple hundred women in there that do bodybuilding. Now go to somewhere where there's a couple hundred women that do something else and just compare the overall look and health of these people. Right. So,
now that you mentioned that, I wish I remembered the exact number, but when I was at the NPC Women's Conference this past year, I remember Sandy threw out a statistic about the Masters ladies and how, it was a big percentage of Masters competitors that held an NPC card, was competed. And I wish I remember the exact number, but I remember she said the number of how many competitors total in the NPC and IFBB were Masters, and it baffled me. Like, it was a lot more than I would have expected. So that was kind of cool to hear.
Yeah, I mean, it's very common now. I mean, so the thing about the bodybuilding sport that if you don't think about it, this is actually what makes it great, is there's levels, right? So you want to do your first show, cool. Oh, now you want to win your class, cool. Now you want to go to open, cool. You want to go to nationals, great. Now you want to get first call outs at nationals. You want to, so there's these many levels. And for a while, I was having girls, women, even men turn pro in the Masters divisions, and there was nothing for them to do. Now, I think the promoters have started to recognize they compete and they need a place to compete. So there are so many pro Masters shows now, and they are competitive. I mean, there are times that I'm watching like the over 40 men's physique, and I'm like, that dude's going to win the open. Like, they look crazy.
Yeah.
And a big thing to think about too, guys, if you're thinking about getting into this and you're a Masters competitor or you're a little bit on the older side of things, is compare yourself against the where you are now. Don't look at the winners of Olympia and say, hey, this is what I need to look like to compete. And this doesn't just go for Masters. This literally goes for everyone getting into competing, right? Don't look at the best and say, this is where I need to be. What other sport do you do this in? What sport are you like, hey, I want to go play basketball. I need to be as good as LeBron James. It's like, no, that's not it. Or, hey, I want to go play football. I need to be as good as Tom Brady. No, that's not the way things work. It's about being realistic with it. And I love what you said, Paul, about the goals, right? Like the stair stepping on it. My first goal was to, hey, not get last place. That was my goal at my first show. Then it was to win my class. Then it was to win the overall. Then it was to get a pro card, right? Things evolve with it. It evolves with it. And having realistic expectations, I think, is really, really helpful as well with that for your overall enjoyment of the sport, because this sport is meant to be enjoyed. It's meant to enhance your life. That's the purpose of it.
Yeah.
Yep. It is absolutely. So yeah, Lexi basically said at the beginning of the podcast, you're never too old to compete. But you got to go see what the sport is about to make sure you're setting the right expectations for yourself. Yeah, I mean, I've got clients that, listen, they've got some loose skin, they don't have great structures, and they love the sport. They can't wait. They do one show a year, and it's like their motivation for the whole year. And their attitude is infectious. They're backstage having fun. And then you've got, the 23-year-old girl that all she cares about is winning her pro card. And if she gets second in her class, it's the end of the world. And, so as a coach, you really appreciate the people that love the sport for what it is. And, I'm competitive by nature too. I like to win, but you do also love that side of the sport. When you have competitors that just take it in for what it is and use it as a measuring stick against themselves to get better.
Absolutely.
Were there any other topics, Lexi? Because I know we had a few.
So I wanted to cover like the skin, the loose skin, the skin elasticity. I guess somebody did ask, let me pull it up again. Somebody asked, they were kind of curious about muscle retention as you get older. So somebody asked, would you need longer off seasons as you get older in order to retain your muscle?
I would say opposite. The longer you have your muscle, the more secure it is in prep. Evan, you can talk about this. Like competitors that have been lifting for 2 or 3 years, that first prep, you tend to sacrifice a little bit of that muscle because it hasn't like been established for very long.
Yeah.
Yeah, the more mature muscle you have, the easier it is to keep and the harder it is to lose.
Right. I think I think people think that losing muscle is a lot easier than it actually is. I think
Right.
I don't think people realize muscle, like you're not just gonna lose it, especially if you're continuing to lift, you're continuing to eat a high protein diet. Like it's just not gonna start like going places.
No, as long as you're not an idiot.
Yeah,
Right.
losing muscle is not as easy as people think it is. Now, if it's newer muscle, can you lose it easier? For sure. It hasn't been there. It's not mature muscle. Your body is not used to holding it. When your body gets used to holding it, it can be really hard to lose muscle. You have to almost be strategic with it. And I've been part of this processes before to where you almost have to protein starve yourself out at certain times to be able to lose muscle. It's people that are dropping divisions or changing divisions or downsizing. That is a approach you have to take, is lower protein on there, because even if you just eat the protein and you stimulate the muscle, you're gonna maintain it. It's gonna
Yeah,
maintain. It
especially
does
for
not get up
gifted
and run away.
athletes, especially for
Mhm.
athletes that put on muscle pretty easily. When they try to lose muscle, like, oh, coach, should I like do the stairs to burn muscle? I'm like, listen, you put on muscle on your legs pretty easily. The
Oh, you
stairs
gotta put
can
it
actually
on.
hypertrophy some people.
Yeah. Now,
Yeah.
if you combine that with a low protein diet, a lot of times you can kind of
Yeah,
starve that
you can
out,
starve it off. Yeah.
but it takes an approach. It's an approach. You can't just keep doing things and just say, hey, I'm just going to stop lifting that. Even things such as simple as holding a barbell to do RDLs can help you
Oh yeah,
maintain muscle.
Brittany Hamilton she was doing some personal training in her gym. She had to stop picking the plates up and loading them for her clients.
Mhm.
Oh gosh.
It will stimulate the muscle, and
Yeah.
it absolutely will do that. It sounds crazy, but trust me, I have seen it firsthand. I don't care what studies you can point out to. I have seen it happen many times firsthand with this.
Yeah,
It is
you can't
not
study
easy to lose
genetics
muscle.
at that level. You can't. It's
Yeah. Well, another question, I don't know if we want to go in like too into depth on this, but somebody asked if there is a difference between taking performance enhancing drugs as a younger competitor versus taking them as an older competitor. And I think first things first on that, I think like going back to what we said a little while ago about the hormones, I think that is something to consider first if you're older and you think automatically that you want to go on performance enhancing drugs to build muscle. I think you should at least evaluate where your hormones are at first, because that could be the missing puzzle piece. Maybe your testosterone is in the tank and maybe that's what you need help with rather than just jumping on a PED. So curious your guys' thoughts on that, if you feel like there's a difference between responses to PEDs versus like for a younger athlete versus an older athlete.
Yeah, I think that the response to PEDs is based on a few things. It's based off your genetic potential. It's based on how easy you can put on muscle. It's based on how strict you are with your diet and how good you are at training. All that stuff plays factors and roles in it. Now, typically, yes, you will see a better performance on it a little bit later on in life because you have more of the, if you've been training a long time, you already have that muscle. You're closer to your genetic limit at that point, which means you're going to be able a little bit more. With that being said, it is easier to put on muscle when you're younger, right? It absolutely is easier to do that. And the newer you are to training. Now, depending on the type of PEDs we're talking, is it smart to do it when you get older? You know, that's a whole different conversation to have because they will have an impact on your body to some degree. Even the safest things can have an impact on your body to some degree. So knowing and being smart about it, I think it's, as a female, if you want to maintain your femininity, it needs to be smart all the time with it. When you get older, you just need to double check and make sure your health markers are as good as they possibly can be, if that's a route you're wanting to go with it. And look, as you get older, you know, you're more mature. Your decision-making skills are typically a little bit better with things, and you can make a more informed choice about weighing the positives and the negative benefits to it.
Yeah. I
That's my
mean,
overall thought.
I'm very hesitant with younger competitors, especially females, to push the agenda for drug use for the sport of bodybuilding because I just, you know, I don't know the statistics or I don't know the studies, but it ages women very quickly. Like you just start to notice their skin ages very quickly. Girls that you all be shocked to find out they're in their 20s. You'll think they're in their late 30s or 40s and they're in their 20s. So, you know, and I don't want to be the coach that puts women in that position to regret something that they did when they were younger. So I tend to be a little bit more, you know, obviously, if I'm coaching an athlete and that's their choice, I will support it as long as they understand the consequences and the pros and cons of what they're doing. Perfect. My, you know, issue typically comes down to coaches that don't provide that. Their agenda is, oh, I'm going to make you look good for one season and then you're going to be a mess for the next 2 years, but I got you your pro card and I can brag about it. But look where I left you. You know, compare pictures of athletes before and after they work with coaches, right? I mean, that tells you a lot. And hey, if that athlete signed up for that and they're like, yes, this is what I wanted, great. I don't ever want to be that coach that an athlete says, yeah, I worked with them, but hey, fucked me up. Like I just, that wouldn't let me sleep at night.
And Paul, this is, I mean, we've had conversations about this, and there are certain things you can do to make people look very, very good for a short amount of time. It typically does not go well in the reverse side of things for a lot of different reasons. And it's kind of like catching that lightning in a bottle. And for some of them, even, you can look good for a few years and then things don't typically go so well after that. It's about trying to do it smart. It's about making sure that your blood markers are in a good place. And it's about understanding what the side effects are, how to mitigate any side effects. If there aren't side effects to everything. And you can do things smart way where the vast majority of people will never have a side effect. You can do that. But if you push things too hard and you want to catch that lightning in a bottle, there's going to be side effects to it. Not necessarily hormonal side effects, but rebounding side effects of it. And a lot of that will be hormone balance after that. A lot of it has to do with dieting, how you push people in diets, mix that with PEDs and things like that, and especially anti-estrogens and, you know, thyroid medications. Then, yeah, I mean, you can get someone pretty freaking lean never been able to get lean before, and they call it like YOLO, right? Like you're only lean once. And that is something that happens. I think me and all of us here would much rather do it in a constructive, positive way. So that can be, look, not just for your overall health, and that's the most important part of it, and longevity and the sport of it, but the fact we can continue to keep doing something you enjoy, which is competing over the years, not just be here for a year or two and be done with it.
Nailed it.
Nailed it. Yeah, well,
Any other?
I think that's, yeah, I think we covered the majority of them. So yeah, I think that's probably
Yeah, and
good.
if you want to hear more, go on the Pro Physique Code and look up the interviews with Wendy Massey, Miriam Jenkins. I'm trying to remember if I did any others, but
And I can even talk a little bit about like me, like, because, I'm 42. I am not natural. And I know there are things that I could do in an off season to get way better faster. I know there is. I'm not willing to do it at this point. I'm not.
Yeah.
Now, it's about trying to manage, okay, how can I get to where I want to go as safely as humanly possible while still enjoying my life and while still, being healthy throughout that. And it's about doing that risk and reward. And for me, I look at that the same with everyone, where I'm not going to sacrifice your longevity, your life, or anything, even your enjoyment of life. Because I can tell you, imagine looking the best you have ever looked in your entire life and never being able to achieve that again because of what you had to do to get there.
right.
That's not something that people have an easy time getting over, especially when it's something they've worked very hard for an extended period of time, for years, a lot of times with that.
Yeah.
And guess what? That look is, it's hard to come back from. It's hard to come back from mentally.
Definitely addicting.
And look, I'm not saying the goal is not to make it look the best you could possibly look on stage. That is the goal with things. But sometimes the things you need to do to get there are not worth it. They're not worth it. Because you're not going to be able to repeat it again anyway. So most people cannot. And if you can, it's just a few times.
Agree.
Cool. Well, I think that covered that topic pretty well. So I know a lot of people were looking forward to us talking about this. I feel like this has been a requested topic for a while, just to talk about more of like that master side of things. So hopefully this sheds some good light on that.
Get out, go to a show,
Yes.
and be prepared to. I would say be impressed, but also just be set up for realistic expectations. I think anybody that's never been to a bodybuilding show, you expect everybody looks like, Ashley Kaltwasser and Jay Cutler, and like it's people from all walks of life.
And like, don't be afraid too, especially if you're a little older getting into the sport. If you go to a show, like, don't be afraid to talk to other competitors. Or I think social media is a beautiful thing in today's day and age. And, you can make a lot of great connections via social media. So, I know I've encouraged a lot of my competitors who are a little bit older, especially if they have kids, because I feel like their fear is always, oh, I don't know if I'll be able to make this work while being a mom, while working, all this. And I'll say, hey, why don't you talk with so-and-so? She competes, she has 3 kids, she works full time, like, get her intake on it. So I think sometimes just talking to other athletes and competitors that are in like a similar position to you and just seeing how they manage it all, that can be really comforting too.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, kids.
All right,
Pro
guys.
Physique Code. Thank you, Evan. Thank you, Lexi.
See you guys.
See you next week.